I didn't know what to call this video, and I've tried sort of several times to make it. This is my fifth attempt, and I just find that there's so much that I want to talk about. There's so much that got to do with pipes, piping, history, folklore, culture. Then mythology. Then you've got deeper stuff like music itself. What is music, sound waves, how they affect people, drones. There's just so much in this that I found myself sort of at a loss to kind of find out where should I start. And I still don't know the answer to that. So I just thought that the best thing to do was to just kind of make this as a sort of a conversational video. Even though, yeah, I know it's a one-way conversation. I'm talking to myself. But I suppose what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to pass on whatever I have gathered, like all the information that I know. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't want that to sound like vain or kind of, oh, I'm a know-it-all sort of a expert, like as if I'm some sort of a sage or like an oracle on the matter, or an authority. I mean, there's far more knowledgeable people than me, and there's far more people with more experience and greater musicians, greater pipers than me. But what I do have, I think it's worth recording, and it's worth passing on. Because it's well over half my lifetime. It's almost like 30 years of accumulated learning and picking things up over the years, like bits of history and everything else. So I'm directing this at somebody who's interested, basically, I suppose, in the whole complete world of bagpiping, kind of from an Irish perspective. Especially somebody like maybe who's learning, and so this isn't going to be a tutorial about how to play the instrument, but it'll be, I suppose, a background of the instrument that you're interested in or that you want to play. Maybe you've just got a set of pipes, maybe you're thinking about getting a set of pipes, maybe the whole mystique of pipes sort of mesmerises you, like it does with me. And I just think that I've picked up so much down the years. Like, I'm more interested in kind of the history of the instrument and the culture of the instrument. The background of it. Like, what, I'm not really interested, to be honest with you, I'm not really interested in the kind of the technicalities of tunes so much as, like, when I see, say, especially an old photograph or an old painting of a piper, like, I want to know sort of the background of that. The figure that's in that painting, like, I wonder, like, what accent had he got? Like, was Irish his first language, or was it his second language? Who made the pipes? Did he make them himself? Was there a local pipe maker? Obviously you can tell from a painting or a very old photograph, like, roughly, like, what time period that it's from, if it's from the 1700s or if it's from the 1800s, early 1900s. But I want to know as well things like the kind of, like, the social context of what he's doing. Is he sitting on the side of the road because he's a beggar and that's his principal source of income? Or is he just sitting there playing his pipes because he's enjoying himself you know, and if he collects an extra few quid, there's a few points for him later on. Is he at a party? Is there some sort of a gathering going to happen? You know, is it a fair day? Is it a patron day? You know, is he collecting money like out of necessity or just out of pure enjoyment? Then he may, you know, he'd be playing them anyway, so he may as well get a few quid for it. Or, you know, or is he employed by a wealthy person? Like, has he got patronage? Which is what happened here in Ireland. Lots of wealthier people would have employed pipers, or at least, you know, patronised them in the good sense of the word, that they were provided with food and accommodation, money, oftentimes a place to live in return for being available to pipe for sort of special occasions and parties and things like that. So it's the social history of piping that I'm interested in the background of, you know, what you're looking at in that image. Sort of what was the social context of the day, you know? Like, sorry, I'm just out for a walk, so occasionally you might hear a car going past there. There's a few cyclists there going past. And I'll be walking across rough ground in a forest, so if I start kind of panting or heavy breathing, there's nothing wrong with me. It's just so you know. So yeah, so I'm kind of like, I'm interested in that aspect of piping, like what's going on in the background, plus the instruments themselves. You know, like there's some magnetism in pipes that just draws me towards the instrument. It always has since I was a child. It's that sound. I suppose it's the drone. I'll talk a bit about that in a while. I'm going to go deep into this as well. I'm going to sort of just spill my brains out. I'll come off the main road in a second. It's irritating I know to hear cars passing by, but I'll be off this road in a second. Yeah, I'm going to just spill my brains out, like everything that's in my head, like I'm just going to say it. So I don't know what direction. I have a few kind of things, sort of pointers kind of to keep me on track, because there's about 4 or 5 different kind of topics related to pipes that I want to talk about. But I don't know, I find when I speak, I find it hard to keep things short. So if you're looking for something short and snappy and just hit you with loads of bullet points of information, this isn't it. I talk, I ramble, I waffle on a bit, I go around in circles, I go on tangents, but I usually get back to the thing, and hopefully it's worth your while listening, that you'll get something out of this. Yeah, again, look, I don't want to come across as being like sort of pretentious, or this sort of and I know everything kind of an expert. But I think I have enough experience and enough sort of from different sources to have accumulated things between like books in the beginning, like, you know, stuff from the library, like photocopies, like long before the internet. I started this when I was 12, like I'm now, what am I, 41 or 42, I always forget what, I'm always a year out. But so it's, yeah, I'm 30 years doing this, and so I've 30 years worth of stuff, like everywhere, like literally everywhere. Like each press, like in my house, like when you open up one of my presses, like there's something in it. Maybe it's a bit of an old book that I kept because there's a reference in it, of sheets of just bits, like photocopied pieces. Like my computer is crammed with stuff, articles, photographs, paintings, and I am a piper, so, and I've bits of pipes, different kinds of bagpipes. I've played different, like, well, mainly just Scottish and Irish pipes, like, but I've bits and pieces of pipes everywhere, and so I need a massive shed. But I've a shed load, all this shed load of knowledge is in me skull, and I'd like to sort of share that with someone who maybe is only fresh to this. I'd also appreciate if you want to add to the comments below, the video. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna always be right in everything I say. This is my perspective. So I suppose I'll just tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to piping and what I've been doing, and you know, my background in piping. Because for me, when I put on a YouTube video, right, and I'm looking at somebody talking about bagpipes, like, I'm sorry, and I'm not just saying this like just to make my own video seem more authoritative, like, but I have to say, like, there is so much shite, like complete like bullshit videos about the history of bagpipes or what they are and how, you know, from, I don't know, like, just see, there's lots of kind of myths and sort of falsehoods that has built up around piping. I find, especially with the Scottish, on the Scottish side of things, there's lots of just, I don't know, like nonsense that's kind of built up over the years. You know, it happens as well on the Irish side of things as well, and some of it, like, is political. It's to do with nationalism, and it's to do with like elements of history that are just focused on and kind of like hammered home when, you know, and it's always, I'm just going to say this out straight, it's always to get at England. It's always like, you know, England was the tyrant and kind of like basically like they fucked everything up, and that's the whole point of it. Like, and I'm just saying here that that's not it, like it's not like, you know, the total story. It's not the complete picture. It's not the full truth. And that's the angle that certain types of, there's all different kinds of nationalism, but some angles of nationalism does that, and it uses different elements, and pipes can fall into that category. Like, I've noticed it a lot, like, sort of down the years, like, as a piper playing at different events and things like that, you get comments all the time about basically like how it all goes back to, like, you know, how nasty the English were, and, you know, the evil of the British Empire and all this sort of stuff. And I'm sorry, like, but I don't want to get into that, and I don't entirely agree with these kind of comments. So because it serves a purpose, you see, and they use different elements of culture to drive sort of an agenda. And I think a lot of the time bagpipes are part of that. If it's not bagpipes, it's kilts, and if it's not that, it's, you know, the Gaelic language or some aspect of it. So kind of, you see, the bagpiper is a bit of a paradox as well, and that always intrigued me as well, because on one hand he represents, you know, the kind of the old world, this Gaelic kind of world, or a Celtic. I hate using the word Celtic. Maybe I'll get to that. Like, that's a whole other topic. Just Celtic. It's I think it's way too general, and it's a loaded kind of term as well. And I think it's overdone, and it's not even entirely accurate. Celtic. So I would rather say Gaelic, because when we're talking about Gaelic, we're talking about the Gaelic world of basically Ireland and Scotland and the Isle of Man. And I don't mean that in a nationalistic sense or anything, I just mean it as completely in a kind of cultural context, especially kind of got to do with the language, like, you know, people who have spoken Gaelic as their first language and had elements of Gaelic culture in their traditions and society. That's what I'm talking about when I say the Gaelic world. So I don't like to use the word Celtic, But yeah, like I find like the piper is a paradox because in one way he represents that old world, you know, that old Gaelic world of kind of times gone past, but yet it's still here. You know, it's echoes of an older culture. It's echoes of an older, I don't know, yeah, society and heritage, and yes, at the same time, the classical piper, you know, the kilted soldier kind of thing. He's a symbol of the British Empire. Kind of very Victorian kind of symbol as well. Like it's, you know, often you'd see like it's the red coat tunic and the ostrich plumed bonnet and you know the Victorian kilt and the Victorian sporran, and I mean that being Victorian because it's not you know there was an awful lot of reinvention that went on in Victorian times, reinterpretation, or maybe even if you want to use the word like development. If you look at images of, like we'll say, Highlanders, like prior to Culloden, you know, it's not the same attire as looking at, you know, as looking at a Victorian Scottish soldier from, you know, from the Crimea or Waterloo even. You know, how the kilt looks, how his sporran looks, the dirk, like that's the dagger, you know, the jacket, the headgear and all of that. It's all sort of kind of reinvented and sort of redone and yeah, maybe evolved is a better word to use. I don't know, like, but I just want you to know from the start of this video, like, I don't want to get political in this, so, like, and it can very easily because you see, it falls into nationalisms, and that's why I use that image because it is a paradox. Like your classic sense of a bagpiper in his kilt and his sporran and his jacket and his headgear, blowing bagpipes in a band, which is like a military band, unless of course he's a lone piper, but still you'll always associate this image of pipe bands and everything like that, which is it was a symbol of the British Empire, whether you like it or not. And but of course it has the older Gaelic elements in that, so in one way we will get to all of this in depth. In one way, the British system, on one hand, had indeed suppressed elements of Gaelic culture, or whether that be Scottish or Irish, and in another way, they preserved it, and actually not just preserved it, like propelled it on into what we have today. Like they were a catalyst, and they preserved and something that may have gone extinct on its own, or it may have sort of fossilized into something. So, you know, it is a real paradox of you know, is this uniquely sort of Irish, Scottish, Gaelic, or is it a British thing? Coming from, as I say, Victorian times. Is it both? You know, I would say it's both. You know, and even, you know, without getting too much, I keep saying I'm trying not to make this political, but it's almost impossible not to, because it keeps cropping up in discussions. Like you could argue, you see, that it is both, because when people think of a British identity, they generally think of that being an English identity, like English centric, that, you know, everything is centered and focused around Englishness and English culture and that Anglo-Saxon kind of thing. But the proper meaning of British actually means Scottish, Irish, English and Welsh collectively, like our two islands collectively, and our cultures. And I say cultures plural because even you take England itself, like there's there's Northern English culture and then there's Southern English culture. Like even England has its own cultures within it. So is Wales and so is Scotland. Like the classic kind of thing in Scotland would be, the difference between like Highland culture and Lowland culture. Then you've got Island culture, and then you've got even differences in oil. Like you've got the Western Isles with the Gaelic element of things, and then you've got like the Northern Islands like Shetland and Orkney, which have a different culture again. They're more Norse. They have a Norse background. Ireland as well. There's like. See, now you're saying, like, you're waffling on, what has this got to do with bagpipes? It has, because the cultural background of our countries all comes together in the end into that image, as I was saying, of a piper sitting there playing his bagpipes. All of that cultural history, heritage, the mixing of cultures down through the centuries, elements of things are coming together in that image of the piper. Or the tunes that he's playing, or she. I don't want to get into all this sexism shit either, but like, I'm old fashioned. When I say he, I mean, when I say he plural, I mean like mankind. Even though you're not allowed to say mankind, you're supposed to say humankind, all that. I'm not into this politically correct stuff, so just. And that's not sexist. Like, I have to actually admit, most of my favourite pipers are women. I don't know, I think women have a special touch towards pipes that sometimes men don't have. I don't know, there's a depth in them that, like, I kind of started, that dawned on me one day. I said, yeah, how come lots of the pipers I'm drawn towards are women? And it's not just because they're good looking, like, it's the way that they play tunes. Maybe that's all in my own head, I don't know, maybe there is no difference between women and men, but maybe just as it happens to me, there's one or two women pipers that I just think are fantastic. So let's not go into all that sexism shit. I'm not changing the way I speak, but let me think where I was saying. Yeah, so the image of the piper, like, so what is he? He's a product of history, and of all sorts of strains and elements of history. And I think that's why it has that kind of universal appeal, because it appeals to, on one hand, it appeals to sort of the nationalisms and kind of independence movements of both Ireland and Scotland as this sort of historical kind of figure that, here's a musician sort of playing an ancient instrument of the past that, like, have led our, like, warriors into battle, like, to this kind of thing. And the clothes that you're wearing, even the uniform that you're wearing represents the older way of doing things. And it also appeals to, now I'm just talking about on these two islands, like between Ireland and Britain, it appeals to the other side as well. It appeals to people who identify or believe in or live a British identity, because it represents that also as a collective, like Irish regiments in the British Army, Scottish regiments in the British Army, and just even like emigrants that have settled across America and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Sorry if I left one of your countries out, if you're still listening. But, many of your forefathers, or the emigrant, the diaspora, left as a result of the British Empire or the British system. And it's not always through conquest. It's, it's just like, well, people settled in the colonies for all kinds of reasons, and they brought their pipes with them. And so it has a, I suppose that's the appeal of the pipes as well, is that it has an appeal for both sides of an argument, or both kind of identities share the same kind of culture, and it's embodied in the piper. Like, I think it's fascinating. There I am again. I said I don't want this to get political, but look, when I say it's not getting political, I mean, it means that I don't want to sort of take sides. I don't want to drive an agenda here, but I should be able to make comments on history, living history. So if you take like a very sort of classical and sort of hostile, real experience of like conflict, like we'll say Northern Ireland or the North, you see, obviously, you know, people know the gravity of conflict and the tragedy of conflict, but I just find it like really, really interesting that both sides of that divide, you know, employ bagpipers as a symbol. Like, if you look at many of, we'll say, Republican funerals, it's a lone piper like that's playing out in front of the coffin, piping the people to their graves. It's, you know, and Republican commemorations often have lone pipers, bagpipers, plus uilleann pipers later on when they go indoors. You know, and so they identify with the piper who represents that to them, but also equally on the opposite side of the divide, you know, people with, you know, a Northern Irish identity, a British identity, Ulster Scots identity. I'm trying to be fair, like trying to get all the sort of terminologies associated with the identities. But anyway, on the opposite side, say on the unionist side, or unionism, like, equally has bagpipers for their funerals and their commemorations, and, you know, pipe bands are very, very strong in Northern Ireland, and of course that's the association with the Scots, Ulster Scots heritage and tradition. So in a place as small as Northern Ireland, where you have two polar opposite identities and kind of political outlooks or whatever like that, the bagpiper is claimed by both sides. It's not seen as one thing or the other, and that sort of fascinates me, because it's, you know, as I say, it's the embodiment of what you believe your culture to be, a piper. And I think that's the difference between, it's not the difference, it's just one difference. Like, I'm just kind of touching the tip of the iceberg with all of this, but I think it's important. And as I said, look, all the stuff I'm talking about here, I don't know what direction it's going to go in. I'm not good at planning these things, because then I think of another thought, and then I have to talk about that before I forget about it and all of that. So I suppose I'm just talking about, you know, like, why the bagpiper? And yeah, it's because he is the embodiment, like the image of a culture, of your culture, even though it can be opposite, you know, sort of divisions, like, as I said, for Ireland, on the one island, like, both sides identify with the piper. And I find that fascinating, because it's just, it's yet like another representation of our cultural history. You see, a lot of cultural histories have images and things that represent them that the other side doesn't have. So, you know, it's kind of, you know, well, we're us because we're different. But as I say, I suppose I'm just going on about this point too much. I just find it fascinating that that it's it represents kind of Irish nationality, and I mean the instrument itself and the piper. Like what you are talking about especially an uilleann piper, obviously for Ireland, like this, and uilleann pipes are unique to Ireland as they are played uilleann pipes. But people forget that you've got very, very similar kinds of pipes played in Scotland. Like you've got like the lowland pipes, border pipes, then north of England, last place, like the Northumbrian half-longs, which are sort of border pipes, Northumbrian pipes. Each place, like even when I go to naked division, we say, well, Ireland's unique because of uilleann pipers. Well, yeah, well, Scotland's unique because of their pipes, and England is unique because of her pipes, and so I think a lot of it is that, like, I think that's one aspect of what draws us to the instrument. It's that, that sense of place. It's, the instrument really represents, like, it's so much of a contradiction, because the more I'm talking about this and the more I'm thinking about it, almost every country in Europe has their own bagpipe. So, like, obviously we all know that the French played them, we all know that the Spaniards played them, Sweden has a bagpipe, the Italians have the biggest bagpipe of all. So it's not a uniquely Irish, Scottish, British, Western European thing at all. Like, but for some reason, I think our peoples, like the peoples who live on our two islands, and our descendants who live across the world, have taken the pipes to their heart, that they have come to represent our two islands, more so than other countries don't do that. I suppose the Spanish play the guitar, but guitar is universal now. But yeah, that's that's one aspect of that kind of cultural imagery of the piper that drew me towards the instrument as well. I'm nationalistic in my own way, not in the textbook sense, or I don't want to talk about that, because I'm here to talk about bagpipes. But I love my country. I love my heritage. I'm so deeply interested in my country's history, and where that has brought us to today, and the pipes play a huge role in that. And even for me as a child, like, it always represented that. Like, the pipes, initially to me, the pipes always represented Ireland and Scotland. But as I've learned more and more, I've seen now, the history of bagpipe in England, like outside of Scotland, south of the border. Like, what an amazing like culture that they once had of bagpiping that's now gone. Unfortunately, only the north of England now have just clung on. With the like two sets of pipes that are left now. But I will talk about the English pipes as well, and so that was what kind of like that. That's one of the things I think that has the appeal. It's the imagery of it all, and the kind of cultural background that's behind that imagery, that we can all identify with on both islands. And as I say, our descendants and cousins, from emigration, they can still hear pipes, and it somehow reminds them of home. Especially Ireland and Scotland. I think it's unfortunate that the pipes fell out of place. Like, in England, they didn't have the same, I don't know, culturally or whatever. They never had the same kind of respect for them, I would put it. Now, I could be wrong, but I think, pipes were played up and down England, but they didn't have the same cultural sort of appreciation as they did in like the Gaelic world. Kind of took on the pipes, like kind of preserved the pipes, like had a real social standing and kind of place sense of central sense of place in Gaelic culture more so than what it did in other cultures. But I will elaborate on all of that. So the whole point of me making this video is to share everything that I know and to debunk some of the myths I think that have, or at least argue against them. You know, the myths that are perpetuated about like the likes of bagpiping and kilts and the history of it. Because as I say, when I go on Google, there's just so much shit. Like, it's embarrassing. And a lot of it is people who don't even play the bagpipes. Like, they don't know what they're talking about. Or if they do, God forgive me, they play them badly. And I'm not the best piper by any stretch at all. I'm not. Like, I don't think that I am the greatest piper, or nowhere near, like, anywhere where I'd like to be with them. But there's some people just making YouTube videos and they're literally strangling the instrument, and they put a person off playing them, and then they go on and they start like speaking with authority on the history of the instrument, like that. And it's all just stuff that they just saw somewhere else, I suppose. My information is just stuff that I saw somewhere else as well, but like, you know, it's the same sources just get rehashed all the time, and you know. So I'm making this to dispel these kind of things, or at least, as I say, argue against them.